scientists called homophily, and I use the phrase people like me, PLM, which is just deep down, almost all of us prefer people that are like us, that look like us, sound like us, have the same interest as us. You know, we sort of wish we weren't those people. Sometimes we can pretend we're not those people. We really are those people. When we start paying attention to these very granular tribalisms, if you notice who you feel warm towards, it is people who remind you of yourself. Or someone you love, maybe. People who you feel less warm towards, they will not be reminding you of yourself. It is as sort of simple and embarrassing as that. And this was all over first century Palestine. Jesus sees these dynamics playing out, and then he walks between these tribes and he absolutely explodes these purity boundaries. And he, like, mischievously, puckishly, repeatedly upends the tribes that are all over. And realizing that I could do that and it actually looked quite fun was a big breakthrough moment for me. I was like, oh, this might actually cause a little bit of good trouble if I am seen with people I'm not supposed to be seen with.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Our show is powered by you, the listener. If you want to support the work that we do, get early access to episodes, episode guides, and more, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture to become a monthly patron so that we can continue in this important work. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each week. And go leave a rating and review. It's easy. It only takes a second, and it helps us find new listeners to the show. Just go to the show page on the app that you're using right now and hit 5 stars. Thank you so much. You know what else would help us out? Share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network. Tell them how much you enjoy it and let them know that they should be listening as well. If you're new here, welcome. If you want to dig deeper, find us on social media at Shifting Culture Podcast, where I post video clips and quotes and interact with all of you. Previous guests on the show have included Michael Ware, Caitlin Chess, and Sky Jitani. You can go back, listen to those episodes, and more. But today's guest is Elizabeth Oldfield. Elizabeth Oldfield hosts the Sacred Podcast and is the former director and now senior fellow of the think tank Theos. She appears across the media, including BBC Radio and television, Unheard, the Financial Times, and beyond. Oldfield is also a contributing editor at Comment Magazine, chair of Larger Us, and a coach and consultant working with purpose-driven individuals and organizations. She lives in an intentional community in South London with her husband and children. Her book, Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times, is out now. Did you know that we do live in turbulent times? I know that we have all felt the shaking in the past many years. Division, death, disconnection, wreak havoc. There are ways that we cope that don't bring life and joy, but only more sorrow and pain. But there are ways that make us more fully alive. There are practices that enable a life of flourishing and may just save our civilization. And that's what Elizabeth Oldfield does in this conversation. She talks about the importance of relationships and connection and living a fully alive life. We walk through how her early life experiences led her to question what a good life entails, and she came to see that relationships are central. She talks about challenges like consumerism that discourage connection and practices like community living that can help cultivate generosity and care for others. We share that listening across differences and protecting vulnerable groups are keys to building a more just and compassionate society. So join us as we discover ways that make us more fully alive. Here is my conversation with Elizabeth Oldfield. Elizabeth, welcome to Shifting Culture. Really excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
I am very happy to be here.
Well, that is good. I love your book, Fully Alive. It is fantastic. It helps us walk through these places to figure out what is the good life? What is life supposed to be about? How do we walk in places? Where did this impetus for figuring out what it looks like to be fully alive, how did that come about in your own life? Where did that come from?
Interesting. I think it crept up on me slowly. I have always been someone interested in ideas and a very, very intense consumer of novels. And one of the things that I think that novels does is it projects you into other people's lives, right? Other people's shoes, other people's hearts and heads. So it should naturally give you an interest in what a good life looks like and what wisdom is. I think becoming a Christian in my teens really forces those kind of questions to the surface. And then a really bad accident in my early 20s that didn't quite bring me up close to my own mortality, but brought me up close to my own limitations and my own vulnerability, sent me to a bunch of funerals. A collection of those things made this question more and more central to my life.
To be fully honest, that's a very interesting thing to happen so early on in your life. A lot of times we get to, you get to midlife, you're looking at the second half of life and you're trying to figure out, let's look back. What does actually living life look like? What does wisdom for the rest of my life look like? And these are the middle-age questions. Why do you think it started to pop up early on in your life?
Yeah, maybe I was just an old soul. Never really at home in a young person's body. I do think it was this... So the weird confluence of things where I really shattered my leg in a skiing accident and had to move back in with my parents, having just kind of like blasted into adult life. I got my first job at the BBC and my first flat in London. I was living this very kind of independent Sex and the City life in my head. Not actually Sex and the City life, but whatever the kind of, clean young Christian version of that was. And when I moved home, there just happened to be this spike in funerals. There were 3 people in our extended family that had passed away, and I might not actually have got to their funerals if I hadn't been fully dependent on my parents for care. At that point, I was in a wheelchair, my leg was in a cast, I couldn't weight bear at all, I was on a lot of drugs. So I just went to these funerals over the course of a few weeks. And there's something about funerals that are very clarifying, because the things that someone says at the end of their life is really, it's a really hard thing to do usually. How do you sum up someone's life? How do you say, this is what this person meant in the world? This is what remains of them. This is what we will take with us in our memories into the future. I just became incredibly clear how all the things that I was focusing on in my early 20s were pretty much irrelevant. No one really cared if they were impressive in their career. Like, I'm sure if they were a Nobel Prize winner, would have got mentioned. And if one of them was a nurse and there was this definite sense of like the care that they extended to their patients left a legacy. But otherwise, nothing about jobs, nothing about appearance, nothing about how nice a house they lived in, nothing about impressiveness, coolness, success, all of these things that we sort of don't consciously think we build our lives around. But if we're not careful, we will, because that's the narrative, the machine that we're in all the time. It's all stripped away, and it's just relationships. It's just, this is what this person meant to me, to us, to whoever they meant enough to show up on the day to celebrate their life. That relational impact is what lasts. And it was just like, oh, okay, so that is what I need to make my life about. And I think you're right. I think it happened really early for me, and I'm really grateful for it.
Realizing that it is all about relationships. I think a lot of your lens now is about how do we connect one to another with humans, with God, in our community, and connect well. And I love even your talk about sin, as you write about sin in the first chapter of your book, is about disconnection. Why is the lens of connection, and why is connection so important to us to live well?
I just think as everything. I think it's one of those things that I came to intuitively and then backfilled with theory, which is often how I work, and I have just sort of relaxed into that. That moment in those funerals, the sense of how I wanted to be at work, the sense of what I could see actually brought us joy. It seemed so clear to me that this kind of deep connection with our own soul and our relationships with other people were it. Martin Buber talks about it's all that's really real. All living is meeting. Like, we are only fully human when we are in these relationships, and all our relationships, horizontal and vertical and inward. I don't know what that axis is. Are working, are flowing, are flourishing, right? And I could just sense it and see it. And then as I came later to study theology and begin to think about what a Trinitarian anthropology is, and if I believed that we as humans are made in the image of a God that is, before anything else happens, relationship, love, connectedness, and that creation is an overflow of that, and that we are made in the image, that it goes all the way down. And then you can look at it in neuroscience, you can look at it in sociology, you can look at it in biology. There's the interconnection and the interdependence of us as humans and of all life just seems like the fundamental underlying logic of all things. But then I'm biased. That's how I see it.
Well, I think it's such a fantastic view to see the world, to be involved in the world. You're looking at, here in the United States, we're looking at a place where there's loneliness is on the rise. People don't have friends. We're disconnected more than we've ever been in a world where there's supposed to be all this connectivity. Like, I'm talking to you across the ocean, like right here. And I don't know how we do this, but we're here and we're connecting one to another over this incredible internet. But we feel disconnected. We feel lonely. We feel we don't have life. Like, we're looking for it. We're yearning for it. How do we start to find real connection in this world that is not just pretend?
I think that's the work of a lifetime. I think it is. I would say the place that you start is you recognize the scale of the problem. And if you accept that relationships are everything, then you need to make choices accordingly, and you need to live accordingly and prioritize accordingly. And that goes very strongly against the cultural scripts and the kind of paths that we've had laid out for us, which is that, individual self-actualization, individual fulfillment, autonomy and freedom and choice are what a good life is. There's almost something moral about freeing yourself from constraints in order to follow your one true path and find, your one true vocation. And I think there's healthy and unhealthy versions of that, right? But the idea that there's no such thing as individual flourishing. There's no such thing as individual joy. Actually, I think I'm coming to believe, or only in kind of small parts. I think the moments of joy that we're having as individuals where we're not with other people are because we are actually connecting with our own soul and the sort of the deep, holy parts of ourselves, and we're connecting with the love of God. That even that is relational, right? And it requires, therefore, acts of resistance, different habits. One of the freelance jobs I do is I work with an organization called the Relationships Project in the UK, which is a sort of mainstream secular charity trying to help people across the board to see that that prioritizing good relationships make everything better. So in the health service, in education, and it's incredibly hard work because of what they call the frilly fallacy, which is because you can't measure relationships very easily. And when you try to, they very easily get warped and instrumentalized. Facebook friends is not the same thing. Because we live in this very econometric logic, that story, that big story, F.S. Michaels calls it, that the sort of the dominant story of the economy has seeped into all the other parts of our lives. Because we can't measure relationships, they're as a nice to have. In an organization, it's like, yeah, it's nice to have nice relationships, but really we're here to do this. Really we're here to serve our patients. We're here to make money. Really we're here to help people live longer. And the thing is, if you have good relationships, all those things get easier. But there's a leap of faith required to prioritize them. And in your own life, like, I need to give up some of my free time and some of my comfort and some of my convenience to be in covenant relationships with people. And there's very few places that encourage me to do it and help me and give me the scaffolding, because it doesn't come naturally. I am naturally disconnected, right? I am sinful. I am wanting to draw back into myself and resist the thing that I know is good for me.
So as we walk through this lens of connectedness, relationship is so important. The culture resists that. It tempts us away from connection, relationship. You walk through the deadly sins, the 7 deadly sins in your book. Why do you think that's a helpful framework for us to view the disconnection that we have in the world?
So honestly, Joshua, I did not expect to write a book about sin. That was not what I started trying to do. If you had a real commercial hat on, that is not what you would set out to do. I had this burning sense that there were treasures in my tradition, humane, psychologically astute, liberatory ideas and practices that the world needs, and that in this moment, in particular, the world needs, and that lots of people who had no interest in Christianity and were outside the church had no idea that these things were in here, and that something useful I could do was just try and translate them and try and correct this terrible gap between the stories that are told about my faith in culture and my lived experience of it. As I started writing, and the things I wanted to write about, and these were about attention, and they were about what might actually be life-giving about the Christian sexual ethic, and about how do we create a stable sense of self, and what does it mean to commit to communities. And again, I was like, okay, so we sort of know what we want, but what's stopping us? Why don't we move towards the things that, if we gave it any thought, we would realize that we needed? And then I realized that, someone was asking to me in a different conversation what I thought sin was. And I was like, I think sin is disconnection. Actually, there's legal ways of thinking about it. But for me, the language that most hits home is this relational language, that it is the way we disconnect from our own soul and the earth and other people and from God. And then I was like, that's what's stopping us. And if we don't take the problem seriously, if we don't start with, why don't we connect? Why don't we live in healthy relationships? Why don't we prioritize this thing that makes us fully alive? Then it's all just aspirational hot air, and it sounds nice, but it's not actually going to help anyone. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go after sin, and I'm gonna see if I can translate that most prickly part of my tradition and help it make sense for those who might not expect it to.
So if you're looking through the sin, what was the one that crept up in your own life? You go, ooh, that one's really hard for me.
Yeah. You've seen, I'm really trying to write about them, because the other thing about sin is it immediately makes people feel judged, right? It sounds very finger pointy. And so I'm trying very much to go, these are my struggles. These are my temptations to disconnection. And it's avarice. I still actually struggle to read that chapter, because the seriousness which the Christian tradition, the seriousness which it brings to this question of acquisitiveness, of hoarding, bigger and bigger barns, the root of all evil. Then the particular thing that's always followed me through my life is at the end of the parable of the sower, where it says, and some seed got choked by the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of wealth. And I, like all of us, am part of systems and structures which are continually encouraging me to be a good little consumer, to adapt to my level of comfort and then start wanting the next level of comfort, to really deep down think that I do actually really need very high quality sheets.
They feel so good, though.
Is it a need? The expansionist tendencies of my concept of need, which I think have always been there, right? The Bible would not have to be speaking to the first century audience so starkly about it if it wasn't an ancient and eternal problem of the human heart. And the way we live now, we see that extraordinary catastrophic consequences of it for the poor and for the planet. And I'm completely complicit in it. And reading and writing that chapter and getting to the end and going, God have mercy. I have just ignored. I have mainly ignored this very, very central theme of the tradition that I claim to be a part of. The hypocrisy is really, really uncomfortable.
It is so difficult to move away from that. I mean, this is probably why Jesus talked about money almost more than anything else, right? He talks about the love of money, the root of evil. It is you can't love money and God at the same time. What does it look like? This is the culture that we swim in. Like, we swim in a consumeristic culture. It is so difficult when you have been raised in something and the whole framework of society really works around it, to butt up against it and say, oh, this isn't the way that we should be living. This isn't right. It's going to take a lot. What's some practices for you to confront that within you, to move towards the poor and the marginalized and reckon with your stuff?
Honestly, I feel like a real beginner. We moved into I don't even know what to call it, an intentional community, as a very small commune, a micro monastery with another family 3 years ago. Partly out of climate anxiety, partly out of how do I create a formation for myself that gives me any hope at all of taking seriously this different set of values and this different kingdom, actually living the things I aspire to have define my life. When someone speaks at my funeral, she owned some really great clothes and 74 serums, is not what I want them to say. I want something more for myself. But if I'm not careful, that is what they will say. So we moved into community, and that ethic, which is defined by quite a lot of sharing, is helpful because it slightly loosens my grip on my sense of but it's my home, it's my kitchen, it's my food, it's my money. We are sharing beyond our nuclear family. We are trying to have a posture of hospitality in which people are welcome and they are fed and they are sent away with something to bless them, and that there is a sense in which if we could all be moving towards this, we wouldn't all need to own the things ourselves. We could have one, lawnmower, one Hoover, one whatever it is, set of tools, that we could radically reduce the things we actually need to own for ourselves if we trusted that sharing would happen, that we could trust each other, that there would be give and take, that no one would be hoarding for themselves. So community is one of the ways, attempting to grow in generosity by just pushing our boundaries with it. How much can we actually comfortably or uncomfortably give away, both monetarily and just in terms of stuff. Not very much to begin with, but more than when we weren't paying attention to it. Slowly trying to strip off that bit of me that thinks safety is in possessions and in my bank account. And then practices of gratitude. These are things that sound simple. They're stupidly simple. They're not original. They're simple and indescribably difficult to actually live every day rather than just wang on about. And I am just beginning to take them seriously.
It's really difficult. When my wife and I moved into the Middle East and, I wanted to vacuum my floor, I was like, I'm going to go buy a vacuum. And my wife is like, no, ask our neighbors. And it's really hard for me to be dependent on others in community and saying, yeah, I need something that you have that I don't have. And we can actually reciprocate this relationship and share with each other. And I still find it very difficult to ask for help or to give help. One of the things that helps me in all of this connection is seeing things through the lens of my son. He's 6 years old, but he's asking the same questions. He's like, why aren't you giving money to the homeless person that's on the street? What are we doing? Why can't you give them money? He's talking about other people, connection, generosity, empathy for others. He's talking about our possessions. He started this practice. He's like, hey, I don't need this. I'm going to go give it to my friend. He's starting to give his possessions away just freely. How has the view of your life and what it means to be fully alive through the lens of your own children helped shape what you think about these things?
Yeah. Aren't they extraordinary? The suffer the little children to come unto me, become like a little child. We had a really hard ongoing situation in our church where there are a lot of people who became Christians in Iran and then were threatened with prison or execution and fled, made their way to the UK, incredibly dangerous journeys, are in a hostel and have joined our church. And it means that we're beginning to sing in Farsi, and there's a Farsi Bible study starting. They are beautiful and we love them. And the UK government wants to put them on a plane to Rwanda and on a barge, essentially a prison ship, in the Thames. And the coach to deport them showed up. I think you guys have been dealing with ICE and similarly brutal attitudes to illegal immigrants for longer than we have. It's quite a new thing for the government to be taking, I would say, this level of brutality towards people who have already suffered so much. And protesters blocked the bus, and some people from church went down and helped block the bus that was getting to the thing. And it meant that my kids' school said, they sort of did an announcement about walking, if kids were walking home on their own, there's a protest happening, so like maybe avoid this area, because the police came and then arrested a bunch of the protesters. And so my kids were saying, why couldn't we walk home? And I was explaining that some of their friends they know from church, the government was trying to take them away. And my son went, well, they can come stay with us. And I was like, yeah. And we, in our community, we've been having this conversation all day on our WhatsApp group. We have lots of visitors. We don't have space for long-term visitors at the moment, and we don't have separable space from the kids. And we're working towards that. We want to build it, want to adapt the house so there is a portion that can be given to refugees and people in crisis, but it's not there yet. And there's safeguarding things, and there's all these like complex adult, what is our actual capacity of care? What can we do financially? And the simplicity of a child being like, why are they not staying with us, Mum? Was so, and this is particularly for my son who's an introvert and always complains that there's too many people in the community house. And it was almost partly with him in mind that I had not really taken that suggestion seriously, because I'm trying to protect him from his space feeling constantly overloaded. And when he asked that question, I was like, Lord, give us wisdom. What does this mean? So yeah, they often have this logic much better than we do.
Yeah, they do. It is pretty amazing that they have that. There's another thing, writing about, I think is really, I think it's important for our culture to reckon with. All of these are important, but the sexual ethic of our culture and how things are leading down disconnection, when right now, hey, everybody is free. That's the pornification of sex. Like everything is out in the open. Like you could find all sorts of images. But one thing that's happening is that we see even stats that people engaging in sexual activity is going down, that we have a disconnection even in people wanting to engage in sexual activity one to another. How do we start to rearrange our connectivity in a healthy way, in a way that brings about life, and literally brings about life, but brings about life in our sexual relationships? And what does that look like for us today?
Joshua, I would not deign to have a solution for that problem. I think in this area in particular, we need to take such care how we speak, because money is a triggering enough subject. The chances that some of your listeners will have felt quite annoyed with us and judged or judgy because we, even though admitting our own hypocrisy, raised it. All of these things are very, very defended, very tender, very easy to be triggered into shame, and very easy to be triggered into judging other people. And that's one of my, the Bible is a complicated book. It's really hard to, there's lots of enigmatic things in it. But when Jesus says, judge not lest you be judged, I feel like that's pretty clear. So prefacing all of that, the way I tried to approach it, and I was really bounced into this once I had the 7 deadly sins framework. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to write about lust. Is to say that the public narratives about the Christian sexual ethic are bad, and for some good reasons. But it has been used to shame people. It has been used to judge people. Many people have experienced its communication as really harmful in their lives. And I just think the more realistic we are about that, and the more careful and respectful of that being some people's experiences and stories, the better. And in writing it, I came to have this sense of, I don't think it's what it has been communicated as. I don't think it's what we think it is. I think that there is a very feminist thread to this idea that sex is powerful, intimacy building, vulnerable activity, and that as with power and with money, we have to take it seriously. We have to wield it responsibly. because then the thing I landed on as the sort of two key threads in the Christian sexual ethic that I think are helpful and humane and liberatory are never treat another human being as an object. That just feels like absolutely it's Kant's categorical imperative, but it feels like absolutely foundational and the opposite of what we're told to do. Not just in porn and not just in casual sex, sometimes in married sex, right? Like someone else is the vehicle for my own satisfaction, my own titillation, my own pleasure. I think we need to be very wary of that instinct which is in all of us and see it as soul danger. Because if every human being is a precious icon of the divine, there is something deeply wrong, deeply desecrating about that move. And I know that sounds judgy, and I have done it. And I just think the caution around that is something we really need to hear, in the same way we need to hear, be careful about money, it will become your master. And the second thing is about power and the vulnerable, that, I was trying to think, what do I think is the heart of a lot of this? And in the same way that the Hebrew Bible seems to me to be obsessed with the protection of the vulnerable, with this quartet of the vulnerable. I think it's Brueggemann talks about, the alien, the stranger, the widow, and the orphan. The four of them are together again and again and again across these texts. And when God is angry, he is often angry because people have not protected those vulnerable groups. And sex is the most vulnerable making act that we know, and especially for women, frankly. And so taking care, requiring commitment, requiring faithfulness of men, which was new in the ancient world, of men too, seems to me to be right at the heart of thing. And it eventually felt to me like a very powerful sort of quasi-political stance against extractive forms of sexual activity that are oppressive and do not protect the vulnerable. And I wanted to find a way to offer that as a lens for people who might think it's all just about gay bashing and controlling female sexuality.
It's beautiful to think of, hey, let's not object other people and objectify things, protect the vulnerable. I mean, it's very much, hey, this is what Jesus was all about, saying, hey, I see you. He's looking at the woman at the well. You've been involved with, 5 different marriages. This guy is not your husband, but I see you. I see your pain. I see your shame. I see all of the difficulties in your life. And then she started to come alive. And I love that example is that she started to say to her own community that shamed her, that put her to the side, saying, look, come see this Jesus who knows all about me. But he doesn't shame her in that same way that the community does, even though they know about her as well. How do we start to walk through that area to walk with people, not shame?
I think I've been thinking about that passage recently, and it sort of came to my attention that we read that passage often in this very 21st century way, as if she chose. This woman had agency and she bounced around from men to men, and now she was living with her boyfriend. That was not a thing in the first century Middle East. This woman had almost definitely had no agency whatsoever in this situation. She'd either been passed around a bunch of brothers as they died, or she was a concubine. She was acting as a sex slave, right? This is a victim. This is an oppressed woman. And this is what I mean about the protection of vulnerable. She had been both oppressed and victimized and ostracized. And Jesus says, predatory sexual power has messed up your life. Come and drink, and I will give you water that you will never feel thirsty, right? I will take you, scum on the bottom of the shoe of most of the men in your community, and I will treat you in an entirely different way. And it was really difficult chapter to write because I realized that it was really quite pointedly mainly about male sexuality. I do think there are ways that women can disconnect and be tempted to disconnection in their sex lives. But frankly, the endemic harm in this area of our lives, because of this sort of bodily vulnerability of women and the bodily vulnerability of the act and our ability to get pregnant, means that we are not damsels in distress and always vulnerable and without agency. But there's a power imbalance in heterosexual male-female sex. And not to take that seriously in how we think about this seems to me to be very deluded. And I also had this, almost all theological or Christian writing about sex writes about it from the male perspective. And I want to center the woman. I want to center female desire and female experience without worrying that it will be titillating or difficult or, lead men into sin, because there's no space for it in most places. Sorry, that's my rant.
I love that rant. Good job. Keep going. I think the wrath chapter is really important in our culture. We're moving towards wrath. We're moving towards not seeing each other across differences. That polarization talk is all over because we are moving to polarized opposites. You're trying to do some great work on your podcast, The Sacred, as you're talking to people across differences and seeing them as humans and listening well. What have you started to learn as you've started to engage across differences and listen to people's stories and to walk with people in places where you don't agree and you don't think that it may make you a little bit angry on the inside, but you sit there with people's stories? How has that changed your relationship with other people?
Yeah, hugely. My life is radically more interesting. I came to this work through such a strange mixture of things. I started again with a sort of intuition about some things that were going wrong, and then I was learning about child development and fight or flight and what happens in our body when we're in fight or flight and how to parent a toddler. And then I was like, oh, there's things that happen in a toddler's body when they're defiant and, just shut down, when they can't access rationality, that I'm now seeing patterns in adults, right? And particularly when we connect with each other. And then when I realized that the Christian nonviolent tradition is that it knows all this, that it's all there. It's this extraordinary heritage. And the understanding, I think there's two key things that I came to understand that really changed how I interact in the world and how I understand these dynamics. And one is this thing that scientists call homophily, and I use the phrase people like me, PLM, which is just deep down, almost all of us prefer people that are like us, that look like us, sound like us, have the same interest as us. We sort of wish we weren't those people. Sometimes we can pretend we're not those people. We really are those people. When we start paying attention to these very granular tribalisms, if you notice who you feel warm towards, it is people who remind you of yourself. Or someone you love, maybe. People who you feel less warm towards, they will not be reminding you of yourself. It is as sort of simple and embarrassing as that. And this was all over first century Palestine. Jesus sees these dynamics playing out, and then he walks between these tribes and he absolutely explodes these purity boundaries. And he mischievously, puckishly, repeatedly upends the tribes that are all over. And realizing that I could do that and it actually looked quite fun was a big breakthrough moment for me. I was like, oh, this might actually cause a little bit of good trouble if I am seen with people I'm not supposed to be seen with. And the second thing is that when we're in fight or flight, which almost always kicks in when we are outside our tribe and we're with someone who is not like me, that just is it's a body thing. It's a body reaction. It's a set of hormones that make it difficult to empathize or be curious, make everyone look like the enemy, and make us withdraw. That if sin is disconnection, that moment, the temptation is always there to pull back from ourselves, to get snippy, to get aggressive, to get contemptuous, or just to withdraw, go passive, shut down, create our parallel cultures, avoid ever being in contact with people not like us. And Jesus says, when someone hits you in the face, turn the other cheek. And I came to see that you can very easily translate that as when you are in a situation of threat, resist your fight or flight. Do not hit them back or run away, which are the two natural responses when someone hits you in the face, or you are out of your tribe and feel threatened. Stay curious, stay open, hold the gaze, keep asking questions. And the person, as your fight or flight wears off, the person transforms magically from an enemy who you want to roll your eyes at to a fragile, complicated, yes, foolish, yes, beautiful, person made in the image of God. And that's this really enjoyable thing to experience.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's pretty amazing to be able to listen across differences and to find that common humanity amongst each other. It's a difficult thing to engage in to start because it's a fear-inducing thing to engage people that are not like me, right?
Yeah.
And so how have you said, screw it, I'm going to do it anyways. I'm getting over my fear of uncomfortable setting, and I'm just going to engage in something that scares me?
I mean, I think it felt urgent. It felt like, actually, this is one of the ways, this sounds grandiose, but honestly, some days I'm like, this is how we save civilization. It's important soul work. So even though it's uncomfortable, I am somehow shirking my responsibility, both as a human being and as someone who apparently is trying to follow this figure in the New Testament who is doing these things. And also because I could feel how people like me syndrome, that preference for people like me, closes your world down. And it's really unpleasant being like low-level irritated / full-blown rageful with other people. I was just like consuming the news, and the world was becoming more and more full of terrible idiots. Like, that is no place to feel fully alive or to know joy. And so it was part, this is a responsibility and a calling, and part, this feels like, even though initially it'd be quite uncomfortable, I'm going to get to a place that is more spacious and more interesting. And it really is. Like, if we believe this, if we believe that all human beings are made in the image of God, and that we are made in the image of a Trinitarian God, which is what I believe, then it is possible to create a point of contact, frankly, with anybody. They might not be up for it, but if we're up for it, they're much more likely to be, because we are social creatures. We mirror each other. People pick up on each other's cues. Even walking down the street, if someone makes a grumpy noise as you go past, you can feel it. You're like, oh, what's wrong with you? Someone smiles, you're like, oh, hi. Tiny social triggers have these ripple effects, and we are inviting people into a moment of encounter in our posture. And it really is fun. I have quite a high risk tolerance and quite a high social awkwardness tolerance, and I am probably more of a weirdo about this. But to see situations transform from tense to actually really tender, it's quite addictive.
I'm glad you're leading the way in it, and you're helping us realize that it is addictive. We could get into it, and we could do it, and we could get in the ring.
Yeah.
We need
it's
to,
like a muscle. You just got to practice.
You got to practice all of these things. You have to practice. So thinking about practice, what is how do we organize around these different practices that we're moving towards to become fully alive, to live this life? How do we organize around it? I mean, there's a lot of people, you in your book, you call a rule of life to say, these are the practices that I'm going to be doing. What does it look like for you? How could we start to engage in these practices to pay attention to them?
I do think it really needs to start with those deep values and the sense of, right, what is the kind of person I want to be becoming? What do I want people to say about me at my funeral? And what is going to give me the best chance of growing in that direction? Given the sort of underlying theme of the book, which I didn't really spell out because I didn't really realize until I'd written it, what is formation, is this sense of the way we use our attention and our time. Basically, our habits are who we are becoming. And so once we've sort of set up, okay, where is it I want to be going? And for me, it's obviously very informed by the New Testament sense of the fruits of the Spirit. But people will maybe have different things they're trying to move towards. How do I pay attention to my formation in the now? And so the rule of life was really helpful for me. And it's this monastic concept, which is basically you structure your time according to your values, not according to the demands of the economy. And so we have time for prayer, and it's different types of prayer, and we have time for hospitality, and it's a given. There's no obviously if someone's ill, but We don't have to decide every week, are we going to open our home and feed some people? It's Monday night. There are people coming. We open our home and we feed some people. Like, that's what we do. And on Wednesday night, we have time as housemates in our little community. And once a month, we have time for fun, because fun is a really strong value of ours. And so I think starting with your values and then looking at your time and going, how do I basically, I always think of Mark Zuckerberg being like, he's going to wear the same outfit every day so that he doesn't have to make a decision about his clothes. I'm like, my future self needs as much help as I can give her. She's going to be tired and grumpy and distracted just like I am. So how do I reduce her decisions so they don't have to keep deciding to do the things that are going to form me in the direction that I want to go? It is just a given that I am going to do the things, and the collective helps massively with that. So that is why we live in community. But if you can find other people that you can create some committed rituals and rhythms with, where you are brave enough to be the intense one and go, can we actually take this seriously? Like, could we not just not come if we don't feel like it, or flake at the drop of a hat? Could we invest in whatever it is, this friendship, this practice, or, helping out at the food bank together, or whatever is the thing that you think is going to help you grow into the kind of person you want to be? You have to fight for it. The world will not help you protect the time. You have to. I have had to lock myself in with as much scaffolding as I can humanly manage, because I am a distractible Enneagram 7 and I do not like structure. But I am like, now I know I need it.
So reflect on the structure of your life, the scaffolding that you have, that you go, I need it, but as a 7, I it's really hard for me. Where have you found joy in the scaffolding and the structure? Where has joy crept up and go, oh, this is why I'm doing this?
So I have come to the conclusion that most of the things that are good for us do bring us joy, but some part of us doesn't know that. And so there are so many times, every Monday morning when I have to set my alarm to wake up at 6:30 a.m. to go to the chapel and pray, literally every time the alarm goes off, I go, like, why am I doing this? I hate living in community. And it's like this benign peer pressure. It gets me out of bed, because otherwise someone will be like, yeah, okay, let's just make it to prayer. And I get there and it sets up my day better. And, I don't want to, I'm knackered. I don't want to do house night. I want to get into bed with a Netflix rom-com and a large bottle of white wine and not talk to anybody. But actually the difference between how I feel after a night in bed with a large bottle of white wine and a rom-com versus like a night of actual interaction with people that know and love me is really different. And so the joy comes in the disciplines. And, people used to say that to me. What is it? It's the Richard Foster book. It's the discipline of joy of discipline, whatever that
Celebration of disciplines. Yeah.
That's it. Celebration of discipline. I'd be like, just none of it comes naturally to me. But I now have enough evidence on which to base the fact that all different wisdom traditions have language for this, but my flesh wants me to take the path of least resistance, of numbing, distracting, pushing down my feelings, consuming, instrumentalizing as far as possible. Sometimes it's fine, it's not like I beat myself up about those things, but actually the deeper, harder choices are almost always the ones that are like lead to a sense of aliveness, lead to a sense of spaciousness, lead to a sense of intimacy, lead to a sense of connection. So yeah, just giving myself everything I possibly can to make those choices easier has really helped.
That's good. Elizabeth, if you could talk to your readers and say, what's one thing that you hope that they would get from your book?
Great question. Honestly, it's permission to be honest. I tried so hard not to BS and not to try and make myself look better than I am, and not to pretend that actually sometimes I'm really scared about the state of the world, and that being a person is often very painful. And we can only find ways through it, I think, when we're honest about those things. And I'm so grateful to know the love of God and to feel part of the Christian tradition. But one of the challenges of that space is there's not always full permission to be honest, I think. And people are very concerned about getting things wrong or saying the wrong thing, or there's just it feels like there's often quite a lot of reticence to speak about these things in an unvarnished way. And I sort of want to create a bit more space for that.
Yeah, and I think we could get there. When I first picked your book up and started to read the introduction, and you start a story of weeping in the car after your daughter is singing a song from Matilda, the musical. And so as soon as I read that, I closed her book, I turned the song on, I started weeping as well. And I'm like, okay, Lord, I want a better world for my son. I want a better world for the next generation. I want to give them a place where we can move towards connection. We can move towards a world where we see each other, we know each other, we love each other. We actually care for one another. We care for the earth and the planet. And we're going to give them a better world than we have now. And I don't know if it's possible. Can it be possible? And your book helps give language to what is possible for the next generation, to bring about a new world and a better world, to walk people into a place of relationship and connection and care and love, and to resist the temptation and the sin, which is disconnection, objectification, hoarding our stuff, being wrathful and angry and saying my way is better than your way. And now we could see that there is a possibility to move forward. I just want to say thank you for this work, that it would be able to touch me. And I pray that it touches many more people so that we can move towards that place of connection and love that will save the world. That you did say earlier that this can save civilization of moving across differences. And I think we can, and we can move towards that. And I'm starting to feel like there's an inflection point coming where the world is shifting and changing, that we have already had our shaking and unveiling. And now we're going to move into a different direction because everything has just opened up and we're seeing reality for what it is for the first time in many, many years. And we're waking up. And so thank you for your work in this and what you've done in your book.
Thank you, Joshua. That means a lot. I really wrote it for myself. I needed to find a way to steady myself. I needed to find a way to actually take seriously this medicine that I think is there for us if we choose to take it. And if it's helpful, that brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions I like to ask at the end. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
So honestly, because I just had that experience with all the funerals at that age, I don't think she needed it. If I went back to my 18-year-old self, it would just be brave. Like, be brave. The sort of liberatory journey of just being prepared to be weirder and weirder as I'm like, no, I want to really live.
That is good.
Took a bit to kick it.
Be brave. Do it and walk forward. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
I don't know if you can get it, but there is a BBC comedy called Black Ops that is absolutely hilarious. And I just feel like sometimes we just need a really good comedy. And I have been reading, I'm giving a lecture tonight about power and transparency and leadership, and I've been reading Hannah Arendt on power and violence. And she's pretty dense. She's right at the edge of my academic political philosopher tolerance. But from what I have understood of her, she's really transformed my understanding of what power is. And it's opposite to violence, and it is about relationships. And that's really been helping me.
That's really good. How can people go out and get your book, Fully Alive? And then where would you like to point people to you? How would they connect with you?
Thank you. Yes, so it's being published by Brazos. It's available on that website, or I would highly recommend trying to support your local bookshop if you possibly can, and avoiding the giants that gobble up all of the market. And I would love to point you to the podcast, which is called The Sacred, or my Substack, which is called More Fully Alive.
Well, it's all beautiful work and beautiful things. So I would highly recommend you go out and you would read the book Fully Alive. I love it. And I think I will be handing out copies to people because they need it and they need to walk through it. I love your podcast, The Sacred. It's a joy to listen to you and the people that you have on, to be able to hear people's stories and walk with people. And I love how you summarize your seasons as well, and saying, hey, what are the things that we've learned and how we can walk this out together. It's been a beautiful thing for me to engage in your podcast, and your Substack is fantastic as well. So go out and just follow Elizabeth, because she's amazing. And so thank you, Elizabeth, for this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully people get a lot out of it and they walk forward with connection and growth, one to another, to each other, to God, to creation, and to ourselves. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.